Board of Commissioners study session for Wednesday, August 28th, 2019. It's 8 a.m. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Can we have the roll call, please?
Wheelock. Lapointe.
Present.
Jewett.
Here.
Hunley.
Here.
Kofia. Klaus.
Here.
Henschel.
Here. Commissioner Kofia did contact me this morning. She is under the weather and will not be joining us, but she is watching from home, so she'll be up to date. Okay, we're at first public comment. Would you please read the rules for public comment?
Any person shall be permitted to address a meeting of the Board of Commissioners, which is required to be open to the public under the provision of the Michigan Open Meetings Act. Public comment shall be carried out in accordance with the following board rules and procedures. Any person wishing to address the board shall state his or her name and address. No person shall be allowed to speak more than once on the same matter, excluding time needed to answer commissioners' questions, if any. The chairperson shall control the amount of time each person shall be allowed to speak, which shall not exceed 3 minutes. The chairperson may, at his or her discretion, extend the amount of time any person is allowed to speak. Public comment will be solicited during the 2 public comment periods noted in Rule 5.4, Order of Business. However, public comment will generally be, this is an old one.
Not again.
I'm going to talk to Chris. The chairperson will decide if there's going to be extra public comment during any items brought on the agenda. Please be respectful and refrain from personal or political attacks.
Okay, we have 2 presentations on the agenda for today. I will be allowing public comment after each one, and the presenters will have an opportunity to respond if they choose. So we have a small crowd, but we'll be a little more informal today, being a study session. Okay, do we have anyone who'd like to speak on any matters at this time? Seeing none, we'll move forward to 4A. We have Traverse Connect President CEO Warren Call. We have a presentation on local demographic trends and regional economic development. This is page 2 through 20 in our packets. Good morning, Warren.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity here. My name is Warren Call. I am the President and CEO of Traverse Connect, which, as many of you probably know, is the parent company of the Traverse City Area Chamber of Commerce, Venture North Funding and Development, and a number of other initiatives. Traverse Connect is undergoing a strategic plan at this time, nearly finalized. And the goal of that plan is to develop a comprehensive economic development program for the Grand Traverse region. So that's what I'm going to be speaking about today. So I appreciate the opportunity. I'm excited to share with you the work we've been doing, and I also have to say thank you to County Administrator, Nate Algert, for his support in this and his involvement through the EDC and the steering committee, as well as Mr. Forsyth and Mr. Bott in their help researching a number of these things. Again, this is done in partnership with the Grand Traverse County Economic Development Corporation. So that's a key part of the planning here. I hope that you've had a chance to go through some of the statistics that I've included in this report, but I wanted to briefly touch on the research and why we've included these statistics for your review. A quick side note, because there was some confusion in the press, this is not a new study. We didn't go out and do yet another study of statistics. We've pulled readily available statistics and data from existing sources such as the Census Bureau, Networks Northwest, and the MEDC. So just a clarification there that these numbers are already readily available. Before I get started with the numbers, I also want to touch on the region as it's being referred to in some of these numbers. You can see there that we're referring to the Grand Traverse region as a 4-county area. So that is Grand Traverse, Leelanau, Benzie, and Kalkaska counties. The reason for that is because the MEDC at the state level groups us that way. I also think it's important that as we move forward and act on economic development, we do so with a very intentional regional approach in mind. So just wanted to highlight that. Obviously, still recognizing that the bulk of the economic activity and population obviously rests here in Grand Traverse County. So this first slide shows you the total population of that 4-county area. About 150,000 people. That's a 2.3% increase over the last 5 years, with a smaller but still expected increase over the next 5 years. Those are both positive statistics, ahead of both the state and actually national average. So that's a good thing. The Grand Traverse region is growing in population. I would also say that the second kind of highlighted positive number is our total job number. So across the 4-county region, a little over 72,000 total jobs. That's a almost 9% increase over the last 5 years, with an expected increase of 5.8 over the next 5 years. And that, again, is ahead of state and national averages. Again, another positive thing.
Are those all full-time jobs in that class?
These are full-time equivalent.
Okay.
So it depends on how the state measures different aspects, but it's a full-time equivalent measure.
Okay.
Commissioner?
On the population growth there, do you have numbers on age groups? What age segment is actually growing?
Yeah, I will get to some specifics with Grand Traverse County
Okay.
regarding that, but I also can, if needed, provide more detail from
Okay.
Networks Northwest and MEDC.
Okay, thank you.
So again, this is a positive thing. We are growing jobs in the local area. So population is growing, jobs are growing. Then we have to look at where are those jobs. So this graph outlines, again, in the 4-county area, where the job concentration and industry concentrations are. As you'll see from this graph, there's a big concentration at the bottom of that graphic. So we've added a lot of jobs and have strong industry representation across several sectors, but healthcare and hospitality represent half of employment. Now, that's not a dig on those two things. We need to continue to have a very strong healthcare system, and we're very fortunate that with Munson Healthcare and other providers, we have a really strong healthcare sector. I think it's also important to highlight the value and importance of a very strong tourism sector. That brings a lot of dollars and creates a lot of jobs here. The issue is that over the last 10 years, other sectors of the economy have not kept up. They have not grown as significantly as hospitality and healthcare. So that's a concern as it relates to the lack of diversity in our local economy. We have a very concentrated job picture, and that's a concern that we want to address.
Just a question.
Yes.
On looking through these classifications, there's a lot of activity in this region in NGOs, people working in. Now, would those jobs be just buried in these various sectors, or you do a separate breakout?
There are a number of ways that would be outlined. So in other services, for example, that's a pretty big chunk. That would
Yep.
include some. In educational services, that would include some.
Okay, so they would just be
Correct.
spread throughout?
Yeah, there's not a separate nonprofit sector.
Okay.
But as you know, we have a lot of nonprofits.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, those industry jobs, and specifically the lack of diversity in industry jobs, has a financial and demographic impact. So on this next slide, what you can see here is some statistics that we've pulled for median income, which is just under $56,000. That's a little below the state average, whereas the cost of living index is above the state average. So that's a concern, and it becomes a pinch point, right, for our local population, because it is more expensive to live here, but yet because of the mix of industry jobs, the average income is below average. That is a concern and something that we also need to address as we work through our strategic plan. Obviously, the quality of life, a component, how attractive this area is, pushes up that cost of living index. As a reference point, if you took the whole country, the cost of living index would be 100. Any place that is obviously above 100 is a more expensive place. You'd see that, of course, on the West Coast and East Coast. We are significantly higher than a lot of places, especially in the Midwest. That combines to have an impact on labor force. So, again, referencing some previous slides, our population is growing. Our total number of jobs in the region is growing, both positive things. But the labor force as a percentage of the population is not growing. And in fact, as a percentage of the population, the workforce is flat and has actually been down recently. And that, in layman's terms, we're adding people, but we're not adding workers. That's a big concern and something that we need to talk about as a community. Partly because seasonal residents and retired people have an easier time affording to live here. Obviously, that has an impact.
I'm sorry,
Just go
stopping
ahead.
for a second, sorry, I'm being slow. You don't know by any chance how the US average overlays on this? Are they having, I know it had dropped years ago back in the recession, but and it's been slow to recover the labor force participation, but
I believe in some of the studies we've pulled, we have these numbers compared to, I believe, state and national averages, and I can get that for you.
okay.
I believe that what you would see, and don't quote me, but I believe you would see that our total labor force participation is slightly below average when you look across the four-county region.
Mhm.
Now, if you look at, for example, Benzie County and Leelanau County, it's well below,
Right,
whereas Grand Traverse County is a little bit closer to the average,
Sure.
as you might expect.
yeah, okay, thanks.
Is that chart, I mean, although the drop looks dramatic on this chart, looks like a big plunge, it's only about 5% drop. But with the fact that the growth in the area is retirees who aren't joining the labor force, this is probably expected based upon everything else you've seen.
I think that while you're correct that it's not statistically a huge drop, the trend is what's concerning. And specifically, the current trend downward after kind of an extended flat section. And yes, it is not a surprise, given the influx of retirees and seasonal residents, but it, I think, is a big concern and something we need to address. So that's really, and that really flows into what we're looking at here at the next slide, which is
Gordy,
that-
graphs are all about scale, right? I mean, if this was a 1 to 100% scale, you would hardly see the movement, but it's a very fine scale.
That's my point, you
Yeah, okay.
The other thing, though, I think we're starting to see, and we started seeing about 3 years ago, but when the baby boomer population still comprises of just over 70% of the workforce, in the next 30 years worth of population is half that. I mean, we don't even have enough workers coming in to replace the ones retiring. So I think we're just starting to see the tip of the iceberg on this decline, and I don't think over the next 35 years we're going to see it reversing.
Well, certainly that's the concern, and the only issue I would take with what you just said is we need to do what we can to reverse it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think everybody across the country is going to be doing what they can to recruit people, but we're still not going to, without legal immigration, we're still not going to change the fact that we don't even have enough bodies over the next 30 years to replace the baby boomers that are retiring.
Absolutely, and I think that as you think about this plan and what we're going to be proposing, think about the fact that we are in a very, very competitive situation vis-a-vis other regions of the country and other parts of the Midwest. So we need to be cognizant of the fact that we need to compete and we need to be focused on competing. Obviously, everything we've just talked about feeds into these numbers. Our retiring soon population, which is defined as the 55 plus area, is 33% above the US average for a similarly sized region. With millennials being about 25,000 people and well below the US average. So yes, in general, the baby boomer cohort is moving out and that has a demographic impact, but we're also not competing for the millennial crowd as well as we could and as well as other regions are. Obviously, mature workers and retirees find it easier to live here than younger workers. But as you look at the kind of the aging population in general, we are aging faster than the U.S. average, which obviously has a concern. And it's related directly to the lack of industry diversification. And it's both a cause and effect when you think about the other challenges that we face here, such as the cost of housing, cost of childcare, et cetera. Now, let's talk about Grand Traverse County specifically, because this is where some of the trends are becoming the most pronounced. And this goes to the earlier question about demographic change at specific age cohorts. I'm going to let those numbers that I've highlighted in red just hang there for a second, because I think it's really important to dwell on that. They speak for themselves. Young people like it here, and you can see that we actually are attracting some millennials, not as many as we'd like, but we are attracting some millennials. The unfortunate thing is that they then struggle with job prospects as they try to move up the career ladder. And, especially as it relates to the cost of housing and childcare. And we have to think about what those statistics have an impact on as it relates to funding for schools, rural poverty, and a number of other things, income inequality, and the impact of the future of the region. So this is really, if I can point to one thing, this is the key issue that we have. Losing that 35 to 49-year-old working age family cohort. So obviously the whole idea of the strategic plan that Traverse Connect and the Grand Traverse Economic Development Corporation are developing is to address these issues. I hope that the numbers concern you. I think they should concern all of us, because it has a direct impact on what this region looks like in the future. We have spent a lot of time researching and benchmarking what other regions are doing across the country, what's successful, and how we might emulate what's been done elsewhere in a way that is appropriate for our local region. Now, I think, and obviously this is my opinion, but I think that the answer is very clear. We need to take a very strategic approach to economic development for the Grand Traverse region and be intentional about being a competitive, prosperous, sustainable region that attracts working age population. That's really the key goal here. The opportunity to do that, I think, has some very clear benefits. We need to create a diversified, value-driven economy. Now, that does not mean only, for example, high-tech workers. What it means is traded industries, whether that's a physical manufactured product, a value-added agriculture product, an intellectual property product, an insurance policy, whatever it might be, something that's created here, whether physical or intellectual, and can be exported out to the rest of the world. That's what we need to grow. While also, again, continuing to have the strong service economy that we have that's related to healthcare and tourism. But we need to grow the traded industries. We need to do that in order to create family-sustaining jobs that create wealth and have a competitive wage. Not competitive compared to Mansalona, competitive compared to Nashville, compared to Raleigh, North Carolina, competitive nationally. And to do that, we need to retain and grow the working age families in the region. Obviously, that is the only way that we're going to address some of the stresses that are on the local school system funding, the public liabilities that you have to deal with, and the growing workforce gap that all employers are experiencing. The strategic plan that you're going to see publicized mid-September will include several pillars for economic growth and programming in each one of those categories to address these issues. The four areas are regional leadership, business expansion, talent attraction, and business attraction. My organization intends to be the quarterback to address these issues. When I talk about regional leadership, I want to highlight that what I mean there is what I call servant leadership. So this is not Traverse Connect or the Grand Traverse County Economic Development Corporation telling everyone what to do. This is going out to our partner organizations in the private sector, public sector, nonprofits, asking what can we do to help remove barriers to growth for your organization. That's what I mean by regional leadership. Obviously, we need to help the community set a clear strategy, define our economic development goals. We need to set specific priorities to best use our time, talent, and assets. And we need to do it in an appropriate way that respects the culture of this area and includes solutions that are community development issues such as health, housing, childcare, education, etc. So regional leadership needs to be very strong, but it also needs to be very inclusive. Under the areas of business expansion, this is something that is a combination of what a traditional Chamber of Commerce does, so business networking, making connections, but also more modern economic development programs. We need to help companies with their expansion efforts, whether it's expanding into new products, new markets, removing barriers, whatever it might be, we need to help them grow. We need to make sure that there's public-private partnerships that can speed development when appropriate. Yes?
Do you have any examples in the recent past where the chamber or these organizations have actually gone in with a private sector company and helped them grow?
No. That's exactly the issue. No one's been doing that work. There has not been, over the last 5 years, let's say, there has not been any organization in the region doing those retention visits, doing those site visits, asking either private employers or large institutional employers, what do you need help with?
I mean, if you go over to the airport, the industrial park there's numerous relatively small operations, probably 20 to 50 workers.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying there's never been a meeting, just say, of that group and just a general conversation about what issues are they facing being located here in terms of expanding their business, in terms of onerous ordinances or any other thing, just the availability of talent, working with the college, are they teaching the right skills that they need so there's a match?
Certainly some of those conversations have occurred, and certainly the strong legislative and political advocacy that the Chamber of Commerce has done historically has been part of that. But no, there has not been really a formal setting or a formal process for making sure those conversations happen.
Just to kind of follow up on that, it was probably 8, 9 years ago, there was a forum that met in this room.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I assume the chamber was present, the county, the city, and the college. They all were discussing, these same issues. They were
Yes.
there 8, 9, 10 years ago.
Yes.
And what struck me was, the conversation was, we need tech jobs, we need green jobs. There's absolutely no mention of manufacturing. As a matter of fact, when it did come up, it was kind of poo-pooed by people of, well, not in my backyard. I don't want a manufacturing assembly plant or a stamping plant or anything in my backyard. Hopefully, that's changed, and we would do everything we could to attract manufacturing jobs because there's good engineering jobs there, procurement jobs within manufacturing, et cetera,
Absolutely.
et cetera. But it seemed, and I was taken back, coming from a manufacturing background and observing that. It was just like that was, no, we want high-tech jobs. I thought, well, hell, everybody wants high-tech jobs. I mean, you got to be, I think, a little different. If we're trying to mimic what everybody else is doing, we're all fighting in the same game. And
I couldn't agree more. I think that one of the reasons, actually the key reason why we're talking about traded industry jobs is because that incorporates a number of different things. Again, it includes the manufacturing. And a big chunk of what we're talking about here is working with our existing manufacturing base, working with our existing employers to help them. As anyone in business has experienced, 80% of your new business is going to come from your existing clients. We're working from the same premise in economic development. We need to be meeting with those manufacturers and other industries that create value and helping them and making sure that manufacturing does have a place at the table and it is included in the conversation and an important part of the conversation. So that's really what this business expansion effort goes to. Whether it's a manufacturer, value-added agriculture, some kind of IT or information-based business, we need to help them to grow and help them to remove barriers to growth. So this is really step one. In addition to the leadership, the kind of helping to set regional strategy, this is really step one. Now, step two is talent attraction and development. We have to promote family-sustaining high-skilled jobs. Those family-sustaining high-skilled jobs could be in IT and technology. They could also be a lineman for our local utilities. That's a high-skilled job, and it pays a family-sustaining wage. It could be a manufacturing position. It could be somebody making wine or jam from local products. They're family-sustaining jobs that create value. We need to attract more talent as well. And to some of the earlier comments, we have to show that we're a welcoming place. We have to address diversity. To attract millennials, we have to make sure that their spouse can find a place to work. We have to make sure that they feel welcome here. We have to be a welcome place to diverse populations. And we have to partner with our education providers to make sure that we're producing the type of talent that the workforce demands. So those conversations need to happen. And there has not been an organization that's been driving that over the last several years. I would also say that we need to be really honest with providers and employers about the cost of living and the wage gap. Some employers say that their key issue is finding enough talent, and I think that that's obviously a key issue. Some employers will say that they have started to benchmark their wages against not local statistics, but more national, and they are having a better time finding workforce. So we need to have an honest conversation with employers about how does your compensation stack up against the cost of living here. Obviously, that's done in a data-driven way, so that we can help them to address those workforce needs.
I think that's high school economic supply and demand, right? If you pay more people want the job, than if you pay less.
Absolutely. Yes.
It's quite simple.
Yes. That doesn't make it any easier for the business owner who's trying to make payroll, right?
I hear you there.
But we do need to be cognizant of what types of jobs are we trying to grow, and what are the wages that are needed in order to both fuel the growth that our businesses and institutions need, and do so in such a way that the workforce can afford to live here. So it's a pretty comprehensive issue. Now, this is probably our greatest opportunity right now. We need to do the things in business expansion and site visits and retention visits that haven't been done, but that's really just getting us back to baseline. The talent development is what's going to take us to the next step. Now, the other thing that has not been done locally and is going to be a focus, albeit what I'll say is a secondary focus, is business attraction. We need to market this region as an economic destination, not just a tourist destination. Not to take anything away from being a tourist destination, we need to continue that, but it's also a year-round economic destination. We need to define the types of businesses that we want to attract, and we need to work with site selectors and others to make sure that they see themselves here and see the viability of being here. Now, this does not involve me or my staff traveling all over the world with the governor to trade conferences. Okay, that's not what I'm talking about. That's not appropriate for our footprint. We need to right-size business attraction for the Grand Traverse area. One of the big benefits that we have here is the amount and quality of people that come here to visit, whether it's for a conference, an event, vacation, whatever it might be. We have a lot of really impressive people with a great skill set and capital behind them that come visit this area. We need to make sure that they know that there's not just great beaches and pie here. We need to make sure that they know there's opportunity to grow your business here, move your business here, start something here. We need to tell that story. That story has not been told. And we don't have currently any kind of welcome strategy. If you talk to some of our larger employers, private sector larger employers, who for business reasons need to expand outside of this area, when they need to set up a remote call center or whatever it might be, they fly into mid-sized cities across the country and are thrown down the red carpet in every way you can imagine. Other communities are competing with us for our larger employers. We need to make sure that we're doing the same thing to stay competitive. So business attraction needs to be part of the solution. What I just went through was the lead roles. So as my organization gets restructured, again, Traverse Connect, Traverse City Chamber, coming together for a more modern, comprehensive set of economic development solutions. We can't lose sight of areas that are equally important to economic development, but are areas that we should not be leading in. This is where we intend to support our local providers. So, for example, in entrepreneurship and innovation, the startup community, startup businesses are extremely important to this set of solutions, but that's not an area where my organization intends to lead. We are going to deal with second stage and above companies. There are organizations such as 20 Fathoms, TC Newtek, and others that are specifically focused on entrepreneurship. We need to be a partner to them and support them in growing startup businesses. I'd say the same thing for community development. In community development, things like housing solutions, childcare solutions, we need to come to the table and support the organizations that are leading those efforts. So there, Housing North as an example in the housing area. There's the 5 to 1 Great Start Collaborative and others working on childcare issues. Those are things that we need to support, but my organization is not going to lead those. We're going to support our partners in that. Obviously, the same comes for commercial development and public infrastructure. We need to make sure that our public infrastructure and development is attractive to the businesses that are here and the businesses we want to attract here. So those are supporting roles that are going to continue to be important, but I think it's, I'll get to that question, but I want to touch on this point. One issue has been that my organization in the past was very scattershot, trying to do everything from economic development to community development to housing. This is a clear refocusing of efforts. I'm going to touch on that question.
You just mentioned public infrastructure. Throughout the whole presentation, I've been trying to hold this question, but when you say we need to work on this, who are we talking about? The community or specifically Traverse Connect? How does the government fit into this?
Traverse Connect is designed as a public-private partnership. Where we've seen this done well elsewhere is when it's private sector led, private sector funded, but with direct investment from the public sector where appropriate. So when I say we, I say my organization leading the charge with investment from certainly the private sector leading the charge, nonprofits to some degree should be invested, and our local municipalities need to be invested as well.
Okay, and we say invested. Can you give me a specific example of how a county government or a township government or a city government would invest?
So I'll give you two examples. One is how it was done previously here. The Traverse Bay Area Economic Development Corporation, which I think is the organization you were referring to, 8, 9, 10 years ago, was 100% or basically 100% public sector funded from county, city, and townships. That's an example of what we're not going to do. So as we look at the funding model, I would envision that it should be 75 to 80% private sector funded, with up to perhaps 25% of the funding coming from the public sector. The good examples of where that's done elsewhere, The Right Place in Grand Rapids, which is private sector funded and led, but does include investment from Kent County, Grand Rapids, and other surrounding counties. Focus on economic development for that region. And there's other examples across the state and the country, but those are two examples.
So, I guess more specifically, is your group funded by county tax dollars or city or township tax dollars?
My organization currently has no public sector funding.
And are you recommending or suggesting to go in that direction?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yes.
And what kind of, I guess, I'm probably getting down to the details a little bit, but, what does that look like? Because there's a philosophical balance to be met here as well. You can't have the government picking the winners and losers in industry because they usually pick wrong. And we've seen a lot of state cases of, battery factories that went belly up and, a lot of tax dollars there.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's it's kind of going back to the earlier question about, do we just want to pick, green jobs or tech jobs? That's an example of a government-led operation that picked losers, or not necessarily always losers, but didn't pick winners, all right?
Yeah.
If it's private sector led with public sector funding involved, there's a more broad-based approach that can be successful and has been successful elsewhere.
No, and I agree. The public sector funding, are you talking local funding, state funding, federal funding, that your organization is aware of these sources that you'll then work with the private sector to procure, or, because you're not going to get it from the townships?
I would argue we are going to get it from the townships. But to answer your question directly, there are some instances of perhaps federal and state funding, specifically through the MEDC, that we may be able to access. But that is a very small piece of the pie. What we're talking about here is direct funding from the county government, direct funding from the city government, and direct funding from the township governments.
And would that funding, that would go directly to the general fund of Traverse Connect?
That would go, and I'll get to that in a
Okay.
second, but it's specific as to what it would entail. And again, I'm giving you the kind of the overview of what our strategic plan is going to lay out. I would like to come back before this organization in the near future with an actual set of proposals.
Okay.
But I want to give you the highlights.
All right, and on this, before you move away from the slide, the last one, public infrastructure, partner with bodies to identify gaps in attraction efforts. Any examples, is there any real-life examples right now where our public infrastructure is not up to snuff to go in the direction we need to go?
If we develop fiber internet through Traverse City Light and Power, that would be huge for attracting the types of businesses that we would like to attract. So that's an example of something that my organization would certainly support and would advocate for. Now, we're agnostic and we're not trying to pick winners. So we want to see fiber internet here, and we want to see it here now, and we want to see it here affordable. We don't care who provides it. If Light and Power has a plan to provide it, fantastic. If some other organization wants to come in, private sector or what have you, and can provide it at an affordable rate, that would be fantastic as well. We're agnostic as to how it gets provided, but that's a current gap that we want to fill.
I would also throw out there that the tying into the slide that showed that we're losing kids, school-age kids, and we're losing people in yours and my age range, that this is a question that I have. It's not that I'm coming with the answers, because for many things I'm not coming with all the answers. But a question that I have. Obviously the housing is expensive, and I don't know all the zoning ordinances. I know the 60-foot. Everybody's stuck that that's kind of the maximum, and you run into problems of geometry, right? If you're going to have more affordable housing, you have to have more square footage. Well, where's that square footage going to be? If it's all going to be on ground level, then it's going to spread out and you're going to have traffic problems. If it's going to be built up, then you're going to have height, problems where people are concerned. So it seems like one of the areas for talent recruitment or retention is being able to afford to live here and being able to afford to have, if I'm going to have kids, and we're both working, then how are we going to afford giving our children to somebody else for 8 hours a day while we can get our job? And that is a place where the government, where the rules in place, whether it's zoning ordinances or whatever, is one of those public infrastructure things that we need to fix, need to do something about it, and I don't have the answer.
No, I think that's a very good point, and I agree with you. I think that as it relates to affordability with housing and childcare, we are more expensive than other rural Midwestern towns. We're not a rural Midwestern area anymore. We are not extremely expensive compared to other dynamic, growing regional centers. We need to have the jobs that those other regional centers have in order to afford the housing that we currently, the housing prices that we have,
Right.
which are not going to, obviously, can definitely be impacted by what I'll say is more thoughtful zoning and regulation. But the fact of the matter is, we're a desirable place to live for retirees and seasonal residents, and that's not going to change, right? I do think, and I'm not gonna poke the bear on building heights right now,
Right, no.
but I do think we need to have a really open, honest conversation about density versus sprawl. Because sprawl ruins the community feel that we all value, and it creates transportation issues and other things. So again, this is not a debate on density versus building heights, but I do think certainly that's part of the conversation. Another question?
I just want to interject. So one of the goals was streamline permitting. So we're
Right.
working on that right now.
Right.
There's going to be a meeting at noon today with the local unit representatives to let everybody know what we've been working on with construction codes and hopefully move to online permitting and have a universal application that all the county departments could use and maybe down the road the local units could use. And we've let Warren know what we're doing. We had a good discussion with Kent Wood at the chamber. And so we're trying to play a part here.
I think that's a great example of a solution that would really help streamline things, absolutely. So implementing this set of programs, and again, knowing that we won't get it all right the first time and we need to continue to work and develop all of these things, I do believe, and I want to have you consider that there are some really strong benefits to what we're talking about here. The economic diversification that reduces our vulnerability to specific industry cycles. Obviously, if tourism has the sniffles, we've got a big cold here. So we need to consider that. Capital investment leads to an increased tax base. That's obviously a benefit to regional governments. And a stronger economy overall makes us less dependent on outside sources, which are ever more fickle. And of course, kind of the bottom line is year-round family-sustaining jobs and talent attraction that keeps this a dynamic, diversified demographic mix with kids, with working families, et cetera. In addition to the very valuable seasonal and retired workforce, retired population. I believe if we do this, we will have a more resilient, dynamic, and vibrant region. And that's what I want you to consider. Now, to go to the question from Commissioner Henschel, I will come back to this body with more detail as to specific proposals. But an outline of what that proposal would entail is that any municipality that is invested in regional economic development through Traverse Connect would have a seat at the table. So the board of directors newly reconstituted at Traverse Connect will include representation from any municipality that is invested. That could be, obviously, at the municipality's discretion, whether it's a commissioner or a county administrator or a city manager or an economic development corporation board member. That would be up to the municipality, but you will have representation and be at the table to make decisions. There would be clear definition about what that relationship is. It would be a detailed professional services agreement. We would contract with the municipality to provide these specific services in this specific geographic area, very clearly laid out with metrics, with reporting, et cetera. And I think that there's real value here to show that we're doing this in a coordinated effort across various municipalities, and we're doing it in partnership with our other economic development organizations, such as the DDA and the Grand Traverse County Economic Development Corporation. So I do want you to consider what that may look like. And I want to be pretty direct as to the correlation I'm making here. Economic growth, in my opinion, is the only way to deal with some of our issues, specifically pension liability. I don't think that we can cut our way to success here. I think, obviously, you have the very difficult job of being fiscally responsible and fiscally prudent, and that's important, but I don't think that we can only cut our way to success. We have to grow in order to address some of these issues. So I would argue that Grand Traverse County needs economic development. Again, to some of the earlier comments, you could do this all in-house and house a complete economic development program inside of the county or at the Economic Development Corporation. But I'd argue from a small government perspective, you'd be better off to invest a reasonable amount in a private sector-led operation that has accountability. So the issues that you struggle with are exactly the issues that we intend to address. So I'll leave that as the consideration I'd ask you to take, and I'd take any questions.
Okay. Following up on my question before, about financial assistance from municipalities, you said, definitely they would participate. I guess I was just, until you explained it, I think I understand where you're going now, is that a township, for example, would invest with a developer or with someone who's attempting to move into the area by earmarking funds in some way to try to attract them. But I think what you're saying is the township or the municipality would engage with your organization in a kind of a consulting role to be their advocate, if you would, with the various clients that might be considering moving into the area. So is that what you meant, that as opposed to direct funding of a third-party private sector, somehow funneling is the wrong word, but taking township funds and trying to incent somebody to move into the area, they would in fact engage with your organization?
Yes, obviously I do think that there's probably some role, to some degree, with direct incentives from municipalities to private entities, but that's outside of what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is contracting with my organization to do the site visits and retention visits with existing employers in the township or the county, working on talent development for those employers, and then attracting more employers here. So that's what we would be doing on your behalf
Just
or on the
one
municipality's
other
behalf.
question, kind of different topic. Affordable housing, you've touched on it. It's a big deal. It gets a lot of press, a lot of discussion on it. And I know when I've relocated twice in my career, and one of the things you do is when you get a job offer, you visit and you hook you up with a realtor and you travel around and say, can I afford to live here? And I've done that twice. So I would imagine these same companies over at the industrial park, when they try to recruit somebody in here, they go through the same drill. So affordable housing, affordable housing for the individuals is important. I'm curious, what's your take, as your organization or you personally, on, it seems the affordable housing it's got to be within Traverse City. And I find that a oxymoron. I mean, property is expensive, it's scarce in Traverse City, it's expensive in Traverse City to buy. Property taxes are significantly higher in Traverse City than the other outlying areas. And that's something that's I've always been interested in, is that there isn't on a scale of any significance, there's no such thing as affordable housing in Traverse City. And it doesn't seem like anyone's looking at outlying areas for whatever reason. In a drive from Acme, from 72 into downtown Traverse City, is 15 minutes. So I'm just perplexed by this continual drumbeat of, we have to have affordable housing in Traverse City.
I would liken it somewhat to the conversation around nationally and internationally energy sources. We can't possibly address energy needs by simply only renewables. We need everything. I would say the same thing about housing. Yes, we need to talk about the attractiveness and development potential of housing in kind of the broader region. We also need to address density and regulation in the city. We need to increase transportation effectiveness so that all of these options are better utilized. So I think it's an all approach, all and above.
I have two questions. I think I know the answers, but I want to make sure. Are you a nonprofit?
We are a nonprofit, yes.
Okay.
We are not a charitable organization. We are a business league.
Okay. My second question, the funds that you would be seeking, was that for re-loaning them out, or was that for advancing different causes?
No, good question. So let me kind of highlight a specific attribute of my organization. We are the parent company for Venture North Funding and Development. Venture North Funding and Development, which is a certified development financial institution, does take in funding from various sources, public and private, and then loans it out to businesses. That's a completely separate subsidiary of my organization, and that's not what I'm referring to here. What I'm referring to is any investment, whether it's from a private sector corporation or a public entity, would be directly go to programming and staff to do these things that I've just referred to.
Thank you.
Yes.
May I give a little history? Grand Traverse County is committed to this process. Warren Call was the chair of our EDC board just a year ago, and we presented to the Board of Commissioners a request for an appropriation to engage Fourth Economy to study the movement of services provided by the GTEDC to Traverse Connect. So we're in the process still currently with Fourth Economy, and we made an appropriation we paid back in March, $25,000 for that service. So we are currently in the process with Fourth Economy to design what Traverse Connect is ultimately going to look like in terms of their goals and their plans. So we are engaged. We've been working with Warren since the development of that group, the steering committee, and all of these questions have been talked about a lot during these steering committees, and we're trying to get to a point where we can know what that final product is. But we also have talked to several township supervisors, and there is interest on behalf of the townships that we've spoken to engage in some type of a relationship with Traverse Connect. So it's not just focused on the city, it is focused outside the city limits, and actually Leelanau County and Benzie as well.
And if I can add just one thing to that, I think that the current structure of the Grand Traverse Economic Development Corporation would serve as a great conduit to, if your organization decided to potentially send funding to Traverse Connect, that Grand Traverse County Economic Development Corporation would be a good kind of conduit for that to happen. It would also be a good oversight function for my organization.
And the GTEDC is also looking down into the future, trying to figure out what they're going to look like and how they're going to be organized and what their purpose is going to be. So this is all still very fluid, but hopefully soon, end of the year, we should have a better idea.
You said conduit. You mean the funding would flow through the EDC to Traverse Connect?
obviously, as Nate has indicated, there's ongoing discussions, and we will have a specific strategic plan that is public and will be presented to the Economic Development Corporation in mid-September. But as an example, currently there is funding that is inside of the Grand Traverse Economic Development Corporation, which could be purposed for these programs through Traverse Connect.
All right. Is that all?
That's it, unless there's any other
All right.
questions.
Any other commissioner questions before I go to public? I did
No,
this.
I'll just make a comment. I think, it's good that you've admitted that some of the things we haven't done in the past, this sounds like this is a major change in direction of engaging people on the ground versus, I don't know what you were doing before. But, certainly this is very important to the region, and I think it needs to be, think out of the box a little bit, and I think you're touching on some of these things of doing some things that have never been done in the past, and just engaging more with perhaps what some people view as the more mundane industries that are still providing a lot of good jobs, and I'd be curious if you were to just poll a half a dozen of the companies or in the industrial park and ask them, do they have difficulty in recruiting people up here? And if so, why? Is it their wages? Is it housing availability? Is it, what is the issue? It sounds like we haven't been talking to the people who've got the input to give you proper direction.
I would say that up until this process began, that's true. They were not being asked. What I can say is the strategic plan that's been referenced, you should know that with county EDC leadership, specifically Commissioner Wheelock, who's been involved from the very beginning, and others, we have done our homework here. So we have, I think the number is north of 70 individual interviews that have been done across partner organizations, the Manufacturing Council as an example, individual employers, the development industry, the high-tech industry. We've met with just a huge amount of people in developing this plan. And I think that as it's rolled out, you will see that it's comprehensive and it has addressed making sure we get all feedback.
All right. Any member of the public like to make a comment or a question? All right, seeing none, we'll move forward.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, do we need a short break?
Take 5 before the next
All
one.
right, we're going to take about 5 minutes. And next up will be Gene Drenzi with the Downtown Development Authority. All right, back in 5.
We do too. Absolutely.
I sent you, I sent you the.
We can clearly give money to CEC.
I know, we can do this with the EDO. I sent you an AG opinion that's right on point.
My concern wasn't with the Constitution, which is what your email is about, which was 4611, where they have the authority, not whether it's.
It's under the EDC laws is what I mean.
And that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And that makes sense to me, but they're not EDC.
Right, but the opinion addresses economic development issues. So you have statutory authority within the EDC Act that says counties can engage in economic development that promotes the growth of the region.
And I wasn't necessarily saying no, I was just trying to understand.
Yeah. Yeah, it totally is. Okay. Yeah.
interestingly enough, the MAC conference was last week. And the Census Bureau executive, and I can't remember her name, but I can find it. We were at that point 225 days. So we're still ahead of the curve a little bit, but they were kind of going through some of what the census expectations were. 95% of the population.
Thanks, girl.
That's what they said. I wrote it down. Just say that. So our local contact is a gentleman
Doing a good job. Thanks.
It is one of the goals of the league nationwide is to raise awareness about participation essential in important organizations. And this league is actually funded for free from voting rights and awareness of the census. And that people, it's our understanding that people are going to get letters, but we don't. Fill it out. These letters are emphasized online. That is absolutely correct.
Yeah, so there's a small percentage of population that is going to get.
But that money's earmarked, but I mean, we spent on it.
I wrote it all down and tried to
well,
get
then
a presentation on it, because I was like, that doesn't smell.
No, that is not in our religion.
I'm gonna go get some more coffee and
Yeah.
do up that car.
No, I'll go. Okay.
All right, but I would love to
Get
be part
together,
of it.
yeah, and I think it would be important to get as much publicity.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Just something quick, I got your phone call, I was way too late, but.
You're a night owl. Essentially, what that does is it draws the fund balance down.
They used something several weeks ago, we should be able to pay a certain amount.
So what, and he's, so what has to happen in Canada has, we have to change our L 4029, which establishes the trade, we already did that.
He does know, we don't, didn't need his. Okay, we just, no, I'm fine, he wants to take the lead and take the.
I thought it was better that they all said, we all agree.
Yeah, I know, I agree, but just,
Yeah, he knows.
Okay.
He knows. And quite frankly, this was a good idea.
well, he knew, he didn't want, I don't think he wanted to go on bat on that.
So whether or not you say, hey, I'd like to look into it, or you know it's a fight, it's just not worth it.
Yeah, no, I mean, just, I could argue maybe more.
Cancel that meeting.
I'm ready. Let's round them up.
Charlie, is he recovered from Ironman?
He was on the next day.
Compared to here, and it's just, you have.
We need to talk to him, to figure out,
Either we're being overserved.
you know, I almost read this. It was really the investment, the
All right, we'll get started in about 30 seconds. If you guys can find your seats, please.
No too formal.
And then he commented on it, but he didn't like join us.
What you got?
Yeah, he didn't answer it.
I know.
They're one-trick ponies.
Yeah, the road, so the road bike. So I talked to my neighbor, Caleb, he's the builder.
Okay, we're going to call back to order the Grand Traverse County Board of Commissioners study session for Wednesdays, August 28th, 2019. Back from a short break.
My bike's
Next up on the agenda is sit down and be quiet.
Bill problems.
down, but it's not like you can't.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can't do it.
Don't make me use my dad voice.
That works.
Okay, we're on Traverse City Downtown Development Authority CEO Gene Dorenzi with a presentation on the Downtown Development Authority tax increment financing TIF 97 and Old Town. That is page 21 through 32 in the packet. Welcome, Gene.
Thank you very much.
Say welcome back.
Yes. Thank you very much. My name again is Gene Dorenzi. I am the CEO of the Downtown Development Authority. And I want to thank you for allowing me time on your study session to talk about the Downtown Development Authority and specifically about the TIF plans that the DDA manages. But I think how did you go to next? When it comes to the DDA and what I think it's important to really look back and say, what does the DDA and when were we created, which was in 1978. And the reason that the community the city of Traverse City looked at creating a DDA is really to be a catalyst in the development in Traverse City's downtown and to really promote and help the elimination of building deterioration and make sure we get businesses in those buildings. We're looking at economic growth in the downtown and the Traverse City area. And I will be talking a lot about the DDA and the DDA district along with the city of Traverse City because it's not in a silo. The DDA is not just about the DDA, it's really growing the economy for the Traverse City area. Increasing property values is very important on why we created the DDA, as well as historic preservation. When you look at the downtown and the core community, that is really a history component, and that's where the older buildings are. So restoring and preserving that historic preservation is important when it comes to the DDA and the statutory requirements. When you start a DDA, the operation, when we started in 1978, it's funded by 2 additional property mills on the property owners. So the property owners had to buy into this. Is this important when you invest into this community inside this area? That is the 2 mills that operates the DDA. So the staffing is funded by the 2 mills that the property owners inside the DDA district provides. The TIF funding that is collected is really to go back into the public infrastructure and capital improvements inside the DDA district to promote and do those 4 categories that I identified above: the job growth, the economic growth, the property value, and the historic preservation. The organizational chart, I think, is important because sometimes it's confusing to some individuals. What does the DDA? The DDA does many things. We manage operations for the city of Traverse City. So the DDA, in addition to doing those other components, we also manage the parking for the city of Traverse City as a whole. We also manage the DTCA, which is the business organization within the DDA district boundaries. And we also manage the TIF plans. So today, we are solely talking about the TIF plans that the DDA manages. The boundary of the DDA. I think it's important to understand that in 1978, these are the boundaries that the City Commission identified for the city and the DDA to manage. So the district boundaries are really from Front Street. It goes into Clinch Park, comes down Gillis Street, which is right by North Peak, up to 6th Street, and then down 8th, and then back up to Washington, and then completes that boundary. It does not include any of the historical neighborhoods. This is really about the commercial area within inside the city of Traverse City. It was specific to not include the neighborhoods because the commercial development really is protecting those neighborhoods and restoring and promoting the traditional neighborhoods we have surrounding the downtown. Then on top of the districts, we being all of the taxing jurisdiction in the city, created 2 TIF districts. One in 1997 called TIF 97, and one in 1985 called TIF 2, now titled Old Town TIF. The tax increment financing tool is really a tool that is used by the DDA that was created by the state of Michigan for units of governments to look at how are we really promoting the economic growth and having better smart growth and intentional development inside an area that we've identified. You saw the district boundaries, and then you saw how we overlaid the TIF boundaries on top of that. That was very intentional because we knew that's where we wanted to have the most growth within that area, and then that would go outside of the area on traditional taxes that are benefiting the other taxing jurisdictions. Tax increment financing, just want to go over to make sure that everybody understands that when you put a tax plan in place, the initial taxable value continues to be received by all of the taxing jurisdictions. When the DDA looks at promoting and having new development within that area, that after new development occurs, the incremental increase by that new development is captured and put back into public infrastructure within that specific area. The public infrastructure items that I'm talking about are really parking decks are a huge public infrastructure, along with streetscapes, bridges. This is a pedestrian bridge, but all of the bridges within inside the city of Traverse City rest within inside the DDA district. So the Cass Street, the Union Street, the Park Street, the West Front Street are all within inside the DDA district boundaries. So when you look at the TIF district and the DDA district, it's important that how are we doing and how are we increasing the value to the other taxing jurisdictions outside of the DDA district boundaries. So when you look at the city of Traverse City and the total land area from the county, the city of Traverse City is 2% of the total land area that the county has. But that 2% drives 17% of the county general fund tax revenue. And that's excluding TIF 97 and the DDA, TIF 97 and TIF 2. That's a screen that I think is important to know. And then when you look at a different way, it's really how has the taxes increased into the county's general fund over a period of years. And in 2010 to 2018, when you look at the county equalization, how has the city increased back to the county's general fund? It's increased at a higher rate than any other taxing jurisdiction for the county. So it goes back to the saying, rising tides raise all ships. This is the case when it comes to intentional, focused, economic, public infrastructure activities. I also think it's important when you look at the history of the DDA and how are we doing. When I say we as a community, how are we doing comparing to the state average growth? The TIF 97 is growing at 6.1% average. The city of Traverse City is 2.84%. Grand Traverse County is 1.63%. And the state is 1.15.
Sorry, what's the time frame of that? Is that like a 1 year, or is it a couple of years?
It's a couple of years. I did that, I can get the graph for you.
Okay.
To identify the growth area
Okay.
and how we've compared to the state of Michigan as a whole.
Cool, thanks.
Public infrastructure, and that is what the tax increment financing does. It is about tax infrastructure. It's not about funding staff. It's not about funding private investment. It is public infrastructure that encourages private development within inside the district. And we have history on what that means and how that has grown. For the Hardy parking deck, this is what it looked like before, and now we have the Hardy parking deck. For TIF 97 specifically, when we put that plan together, we identified that we needed 2 parking decks, one on the east side, one on the west side. Hardy parking deck is on the east side. Then we have, of course, the Old Town parking deck that's outside of TIF 97, but that was intentionally identified within the TIF 2 plan as well. Why we wanted public parking is because, as I indicated before, you saw that 2% land within Grand Traverse County. City of Traverse City is only 8 square acres. We need to be very intentional and smart on how we're growing the economy in the city of Traverse City. We do not want, go ahead.
8 square acres?
8 square miles.
Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
8 square miles. So it's 2% of the city, of the county's land mass.
Big difference.
Yeah, that's a big difference, so thank you for that correction. But it's 8 square miles. So when we looked at downtown, we knew we wanted to stack the cars, not have excuse me. Sorry. We didn't want surface parking lots. Surface parking lots is not, there's no taxes on that. We know we needed to have more tax base, so we intentionally said we wanted to stack the cars and have the private investment focus on the buildings and the development and what's in those buildings. So the history that we show is the new development and job growth based on the 2 decks that we have, the Old Town and the Hardy parking. You'll see them up here on the Hardy parking. On the new development, we have Radio Center 1, 2, and 3. We have the Park Place Conference Center, the renovation of State Street, a revitalized 300 East Front Street, and the Chase infill. For the job, for the Old Town parking garage, we have Old Town Corners, Capri, the Ivy, all new private investment that has occurred after the parking deck was built. The job growth, we have Hagerty with nearly 600 employees, and small law firms, CPA firms, 20 Fathoms, and Priority Health. All jobs that were created after that parking decks were created. What TIF 97 has left to do, you have in your packet the capital improvement projects. This is a list of them as well. The bridge repair, we have, as I indicated, all of the bridges within. For the next 2 to 3 years, we'll be partnering with MDOT to do the matching funds as well as the aesthetics. The Lower Boardman River, we will be looking at repurposing the Boardman River through that leadership team. We have streetscapes and the parking structure. That ties to the redevelopment of surface parking lots. For the Hardy parking deck and the Old Town parking deck, we didn't just eliminate one surface parking lot, we eliminated several surface parking lots with new development going in. Where we're looking at the West Front Street is at 145 West Front Street. It's the exact location that was originally identified in the TIF 97 plan. And as you can see, there's not much difference between what this looked like and what the Hardy deck looked like when we originally started this. So building on this, we'll be able to create new development and new growth within this area and within the city of Traverse City. This is the new proposed parking deck for that area. It will be wonderful for that area, and I do believe that based on the other two parking decks that were built, we will see more private investment and more jobs throughout this area. And the jobs that I identified for the city of Traverse City, there's 15,000 residents inside the city, but the jobs are located the jobs that are here are not just for city residents. It's for the county as a whole, for the people to come in to these jobs. The parking structure would be a 20-year bond issue. It's reimbursed, just like any other of the two parking structures that we had, is through the tax increment financing. And the extension of the TIF 97 is needed between 8 to 13 years to allow for the 20-year bond payment to be had. What happens when the TIF plans are complete? The example is TIF 2. So the TIF 2, we started at $3 million, and the taxable value was $3 million in 1985. It reset in 2015 at $44 million, which equates to the general fund of $226,318. So you started with a $15,000 annual amount that goes into your general fund, and ended in 2015 at $226,000. That's the goal of the TIF plan, is to achieve the vision and to achieve what we're trying to do for this region when it comes to growth within the downtown Traverse City area and the city as a whole. And I'm sure you have questions.
Paul?
I'll
start.
I'm going to take a turn. Looking at parking structures.
Yeah.
I've traveled to other cities, Chicago, for example. Are those similar projects? Are those built by the government, or are those private projects where an investor saw an opportunity to make a profit, built a structure, and pays it off over years?
They're both.
Okay.
So Grand Rapids and Lansing did the same. They originally did the local, and then the private came in and bought the public infrastructure. So sometimes there's mix. So there's private parking decks and public parking decks.
So is this parking deck not a profitable proposition to where a private sector company would come in and build it?
I can say that when it comes to the private, there's not a lot of, could it happen? It could happen. But at this point, we see that we have success in the public infrastructure to ensure that we have that turnover and that they're not empty at any time of the year. So we have a private structure now that's right across from the Holiday Inn, which remains vacant during weekends or after 5. We don't want vacant spaces. We want them active spaces.
You define success as having cars in the spots.
Cars stacked, I find success, yes.
All right, because I would define it as it's paying for itself. No matter whether there's a car there or not, if it's paying its rent, that's the capitalist definition of success is it's paying its taxes, it's paying its rent, it's paying its way.
Yeah, and the counter argument to that is that for the health of the city, if we're trying to have people, if you're talking about the entire region, you're trying to get traffic moving in and out, and you're saying, well, there's not enough parking. Well, if we section off this parking and it's all private and it's great, and they can sell those spots for, rent them out for $1,000 a month like they do in New York. But they're going empty. It's not solving the parking problem, right? So if we have a governmentally or DDA, whatever, organized one that can ensure that the system is set up so that we're actually using the parking spots so that those people can then go to the businesses, so all the businesses are, which are capitalist, are actually getting, consumers in them. I think that's a net benefit for the community.
I know myself, I don't have public parking my parking is not provided for public dollars. I pay for my parking lots, and I provide parking for my employees and visitors and everything like that, so I kind of strange that we got one area that wants to use public dollars to provide parking for businesses and visitors and everything, when anything outside the city, we got to provide our own parking.
And that goes back, I know that's not a question, I think it's a statement, but I just want to comment on that goes back to the taxable value. How much taxes does that surface parking lot create? Based on the next door, if you built on that, how much land value are you creating by that surface parking lot? So the land value is really what we're looking for, and what are we creating as a community? Instead of surface parking lots, can we do a better use of land use?
It still don't matter. I mean, like I said, I still got to provide parking, and I pay for it. I pay for my parking at my businesses. I mean, I put it in, I pay for it, I still pay tax on it. Bottom line is, if we start businesses and people to provide their parking downtown here, we won't be talking about parking decks that we're trying to provide for these businesses and everybody else.
Okay, I have a number of points or questions. And I attended, there was a joint meeting several weeks ago between the DDA and the city discussing this whole thing, extending TIF 97 and the parking deck. So I've got a number of questions on that. I am absolutely 1,000% opposed to extending TIF 97. It just, when you explain to people, and I've attended Acme Township board meetings in Whitewater, and I explained that the county signed up for a 30-year TIF. And let me just read so everybody understands what the DDA says about a TIF. TIF works when the DDA makes a commitment to invest in an area, thereby spurring private development that drives up tax revenue, which in turn is captured to pay for the public investment. And that's what you've been talking about. Then they go on to say, a TIF district created in year 0 starts to capture taxes in year 1 on through its expiration in year 20, is the example that you used on your website. And now here's the key. In year 21, when the TIF is over, all of the taxing authorities reap the benefit of increased taxes created by the extraordinary value resulting from the commitment at the onset by the DDA to invest in the area. We signed up for something that had a 30-year period and you're going to reap the benefit of foregoing millions of dollars in tax revenue that would have gone to the county, and you will reap the reward at the end of this period of time. So people sat down and thought through this and said, okay, I'll sign for a 30-year commitment. We'll forego money during this 30-year period because we'll get our just reward at the end. Well, now it appears that the DDA, without coming back to their partner who signed on initially, can just simply say, we unilaterally are going to extend this 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. There's no restriction on what you can do. So, in my opinion, the board that's approved this originally, the county board that said, yes, we'll participate, really missed the boat when they allowed this caveat where you can extend it. So for that reason, in my opinion, if you want to extend the TIF or reset it or whatever, you should come back to the partners and say, okay, build the case again, we need this parking deck, and we need to go forward. But to, I was appalled when I realized, and when I tell people that no, the DDA can't just arbitrarily, unilaterally extend it, they say, oh, no, that can't be true. But I did read the thing, and yep, there's the sentence in there that the previous board obviously didn't read. As a matter of fact, I talked to, before I had seen it, I talked to Ross Childs, who was the county administrator at the time, and he assured me, oh, no, they can't extend it. So, I don't know, they just flat out missed that term. So I understand the value of TIFs, and they're used throughout the United States, and And they're a good vehicle if used properly, but this is not the way to proceed with the partners that signed up on this. The second thing is, it was stated in the meeting by Richard Lewis, who kind of drove the project and looking at the parking deck. And he did a great presentation, went through the whole thing. But he said several times, this is not the final solution. This deck, which is going to cost $25 million when you look at the cost of bonding. He said, this is not the solution. But we're going to spend $25 million on something that's not, in his mind, the solution. And when I look at the numbers that were presented, in terms of the number of additional spaces, because you're taking additional parking spaces and putting a deck there, so you're netting that out. Then across the street is another parking lot where you're putting up a building, so you're netting those parking spaces out. Then you're closing 2 other parking surface spots, so you're netting those out. You end up with a total of, the net is an additional 111 parking spaces. And we're going to put a building up over there that's going to have 100, and this is from your own, 120 people. So we're netting up 111 parking spaces after we close all the other ones down. And in one of the parking spaces that we're closing down, you're putting up a facility that's going to have 120 employees. I agree with Richard Lewis. This is not the solution. If you look at it per cost of what it's going to take to build each of these parking spaces, based on my math, it's about $94,000. The taxpayers are going to pony up to build this. And this, I realize the argument is, well, this is coming from the city, the property owners within the DDA, but this is money that without the TIF would go directly to the county. So the county, which services all the residents in Grand Traverse, is taking about $600,000 a year now, and it's going to grow significantly over time. And we're putting it back to the DDA where we could spend it on other things that are very well needed, I think more so than some of the projects that you're proposing here in the city, such as treescapes and streetscapes and other things. Nice to have, but I don't think those are core infrastructure, because you say in here, TIFs are for core infrastructure. We need additional help in the county, in my opinion, in areas of mental health, the jail, a number of other things that we're taking money that's being captured and spent elsewhere. Under the assumption that someday we'll get the big payoff. Well, 30 years are going to go by under your proposal. We're not going to get the big payback. It's just pushing us down the road. And right now, you can extend this in perpetuity, the way the thing is written now. So I think the money could, I think it should, in my opinion, if you're serious on this, you should come back and present your case and let the board decide if they want to participate in TIF 97 Phase 2 or not, as opposed to just moving, like I said, unilaterally on this issue. So that's my position. I'm sticking to it.
And I would say that first, when it comes to the DDA just unilateral, it's not a unilateral. You have to go back and look at the original plan. What was the vision of the original plan? And is that vision still viable for the city of Traverse City? And have what we have put into place, does that have a return on the investment? And again, I think it's important not just to look at the district, but to look at the city of Traverse City as a whole. So I would challenge you when you say that, well, we're not getting any return on that value. You are getting that return as you look at how much the city is contributing on an annual basis versus the other jurisdictions as well. So how much can the city of Traverse City continue to do that? while maintaining the infrastructure for the larger tax base. So that's what we're looking at when it comes to the TIF, is to maintain and to be able to encourage additional growth within that area. So I think the return on the investment is there. I think that when you look at the county general fund versus where the city taxes are coming in, there is a huge return on the investment for Grand Traverse County as a city as a whole. Relative to the 30-year, as the example on TIF 2, we did end TIF 2 because that vision was done, that plan was complete. So we reset that. But we're not done with TIF 97. There's quite a bit to be left to be done when it comes to that core infrastructure. Those core infrastructure are important when it comes to the businesses that are there and the businesses we want to create to be there as well. So it's a different philosophical, I think, understanding of what DDA does with the TIF plans that were put into place, that there's a vision when we put into place that there needed to be 2 parking decks as we grew the DDA TIF, the DDA district. That was the vision. So have we changed that vision for the city? We have not changed that vision. We know we need 2 parking decks inside the DDA district.
But I go back to what Richard said, who spent a lot of time on this. He said several times, this is not the solution. Like I said, the net up is 111 parking spaces, and you're going to put a building right next to it it'll service, there's 120 in place. So you're staying exactly where you are, and when this ends, you'll come back again and say, well, we need a 4th deck or a 5th deck.
But when you looked at Richard's identification, that wasn't Richard, it was the TIF ad hoc committee that put a lot of time in it. But what I would say is, he followed that up, that it isn't the solution. The TIF ad hoc committee said, and the DDA is working hard with Beta, because as you grow the city, you have to grow that public transportation area too. So a parking deck is not the sole solution for everything. We must look at our other partners when it comes to parking into the city of Traverse City.
I guess my point is, and I understand what you need, you want to do these things and whatever, and there's some value to these things, but funds are limited. I mean, and it's a matter of where do we direct the funds? We've directed a ton of money into the city for this with the 2 TIFs, millions of dollars. And we've got issues above and beyond infrastructure improvement that someday will pay a benefit because the cap will come off and the funds will flow in, just like you said, at the end of the TIF. Well, there's no end in sight of the end of the TIF at this point. And my opinion is I would rather see the $600,000 a year come back to the county to spend on some other areas that I think perhaps have more value to the community as a whole, not just to the city, but the community as a whole that needs these services. And when you capture, I guess is the word used, from the county, the revenue that would normally come in with the progression, we're either cutting services because we can't provide the services that we should, or we're putting millages in place, which I am not pleased to do either. So I understand on your side of the fence, where your focus is, and we're supposed to be patient and wait for the big payday.
So, and I would encourage you to look at the data, though, Commissioner LaPointe, to look at how are the other areas outside of the DDA district increasing at a faster rate. So everybody's focused on that big payday, but we also need to focus on the future. And what is that future that we're trying to get at? So I'd be happy to talk further with you, and
I'd like you to come to the next township meeting in Whitewater and explain the benefits.
I'm going to the Township Association meeting next week.
Okay.
So that'd be a great place to go. But I'd be happy to go to Whitewater as well.
Okay.
So I'm torn on TIFs generally because, you know, the more complicated you make things, even when they are successful, they're hard to communicate. A lot of people, if they're not spending a whole bunch of time on them, they don't trust them and so forth. But specifically to Commissioner LaPointe's issue about, you know, we're sending all of this money to the TIF district, and so as a result, that $600,000 or so, we have to cut services elsewhere. I mean, I'm pretty confident that the argument that you would state is that that $600,000 in revenue, in principle, in theory, wouldn't exist but for the activities of the TIF district. That's the whole point, is we capped it at, it's not like we took taxes away from the county at some point. Instead, we said, okay, we're going to stop the taxes, but with that money, we're going to invest it in a way that's going to yield ultimately more taxes, or certainly a higher taxable value, because we've got a finite amount of land, and we're going to use these investments to use that land more efficiently, which is why we're, I mean, so, like I say, I'm torn because I don't like the idea of extending the time frame. Certainly don't like the idea of extending the time frame indefinitely. But and the parking doesn't solve, the parking deck does not solve the parking problem, because as you grow, and if you're growing in a dense fashion, again, to the geometry thing, you're putting more people traveling on those streets. If they're traveling by car, they have to park somewhere. So if you have more people, you're going to have more parking, and so it doesn't ultimately solve the problem. And I definitely get that. But is there a way within our universe of options to have the parking deck in question, which, if that's going to enable the development of a property on the opposite side of the street that, has 120 employees, so it needs 120 more parking spots, but on the other hand, that's a development that's going to add millions of dollars to the tax rolls, right? I mean, that's the idea, that you can rebalance or recap or whatever, but in a way that isn't static for the next 12 years, but instead is kind of a hybrid where we're continuing to grow the base so that the county can feel like they are in real time recognizing some of the appreciation that they're seeing in the county as a whole, but the incremental difference gets capped, right? So that there's like a 1% or 2% or whatever the percent growth is in the county or the other jurisdictions not capture, right? So the money that's flowing to the county, but you're still able to capture some of that incremental growth in the TIF district and still have the economics work for the
bond repayment.
Yeah. I don't know. Does that, in other words, is there some way of making a hybrid? So we're somewhat realigning the books, but at the same time still able to make the bond payment.
So you basically are saying, is there availability of a cost-sharing mechanism for the incremental increase between where we are and the leftover funds that we don't need for public infrastructure?
Yeah, I think so.
Kind of like that?
I think that's what I'm saying.
I think we started those conversations, and it's basically we need to talk with our bond counsel and our financial as we look at bond issues to ensure that the City of Traverse City's full faith and credit is protected. So that's what we need to look for first, to make sure that the TIF payments can be made. There should be enough TIF, but there's also, we need to look holistically and how we're going to do that.
Okay.
Commissioner Klaus?
Gene, the parking structures, the Hardy parking deck, that's a city That's a city-owned?
It's a city-owned parking structure, yes.
And then you were talking about the private parking structures. Is that what I would say, the Plant Moran
Yes.
building? So, and I'll just refer to it as Plant Moran building.
Okay.
I go there on occasion and I pull in there. There's a open parking spot. I don't pay for parking meter, don't pay for anything there. They pay taxes on that structure, I'm sure. That's not in the TIF district.
That's correct.
What's the difference for what they deemed responsible for them putting up their building? They saw that they needed parking, they provided parking. These other office buildings or whatever's proposed to be built, why don't they attach a parking structure to their facility? And it'll cut down on the footprint of their office space or retail, whatever they're doing. But the Plant Moran building, they paid for everything, I'm assuming, and I'm assuming they didn't get any help from the TIF district.
No.
That looks, to me, looks like the viable way to put up a structure. But yeah, I couldn't be in support, not that it matters, because we really won't have a say in the, in the extending or expanding on the TIF. But I think with having somebody in your, right in the city, as the Plant Moran building, I mean, that's a prime example as to how a development should be done, in my opinion.
And I go back to what the original plan is when you look at what's the land value and how do we want to build that small area that we're trying to get more office space, more development. So when the value of a parking deck and the taxes on the parking deck versus a tax on a commercial office building is significantly different. So it goes back to that return and there's not a lot of jobs that are associated with a parking spot, but it is associated with that spot, associated to a building where that job is at. So if we really focus on an area for parking instead of building parking, it's a much better land use and a better return on the investment.
So going back to the Plant Moran, I'm sure they would have chosen to build all office space, and they would have they probably would have been happy to pay what they did for their parking structure if they could have put that money into a parking structure right nearby, knowing that they wouldn't be paying taxes every year on that parking structure. That if they would have put that money to help put up a parking structure, they would have been money ahead.
And what was recommended at the time was build a building and can your employees walk a block or two? So it comes back to that walkability too. You don't have to have your parking right here. You can walk. The Chicago example, you don't park and then go in the parking deck and go to your job. To be a healthy downtown, you really need to have more of that walkable component and know that you're going to park and walk. You don't have to have the parking right next to the building. But that's a mindset that we as Americans need to get out of, and we need to be able to be okay to get out of the car and walk to your job.
Right, but my point was just that they paid for those spots.
But as we encouraged, yes, they did.
All right, I'm going to say my piece, then we'll do round two. Gene, thank you for being here, and I really appreciate that you are doing your job to the best of your ability, and you are representing your position. And for a DDA to have the opportunity to, capture this amount of money and continue your mission, you're doing your job. My concern is how this goes about. This is really a decision of the city of Traverse City. The city commission has to approve this. Am I correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay. And what we've discovered here at the tail end, the few remaining years of this TIF is that the city no longer has to go to all of the parties involved to make this a bigger deal than it was when we all agreed to it. So it's kind of, like you're buying a house and you're almost got your mortgage paid off and you're going to reap the benefits, and someone's saying, well, we're going to charge you an extra $50,000 for that house. We're just going to tack that onto your mortgage, and, well, you can't do anything about it because that's our decision. Grand Traverse County partners with the city of Traverse City, and I really appreciate that. Going to county association, MAC, Michigan Association of Counties events, and talking to other county commissioners. I talked to a municipal employee from a different state just this last weekend I had met while I was traveling, and we really have something special here. Like, our law enforcement shares a building with city law enforcement, county and city together. The collaboration in this county between the city and the county is really remarkable. We should be proud of that. We share this building, the governmental center. If someone needs to get a marriage license and they live in the city and they want to, pay their utility bill, we're all in one building. It's the best case scenario for the citizens. I appreciate that. This is the county seat is Traverse City, Grand Traverse County. And I feel like for the city commission to go and make this deal bigger than we agreed to without the consent of those involved is a slap in the face. It's a slap in the face to not come to the other units of government that are giving up revenue and unilaterally expand this district. So without regard to the benefits of the project, it sounds like a great project, but without coming to us and saying, last week we had to vote to send a letter to the state of Michigan explaining why we're behind on our debt. Our pension debt is below the state minimum. And if the state doesn't accept that, then we have to come up with a larger plan. If they don't accept that, we're looking at an emergency manager, which we're a long ways from because we're doing good. And this board, I commend because it's done more than I've seen any board in the past do about this problem. We are paying head and shoulders above as much as we can. We need the revenue to pay down this debt because we're below the state minimum for our pension debt. And if the city comes in and says, we're just going to take, this $700,000 a year for the next few years more, we know you need it, but we're going to take it because we want it for this project. I think that really shakes the foundation we built all this collaboration on.
Courtney? Okay, I just have a couple additional points, and I will send you this document. One thing I was struck by when the discussion went up about the need for the parking deck and the financing, there was two takeaways. One was this is not the final solution. And number two is this can only go forward. The third deck can only be built if TIF 97 is extended 8 or 10 or 14 years or whatever. Period. End of story. There was absolutely no discussion of revenue from that. It was never in the presentation, what kind of revenue are we going to derive from this parking deck? Nobody asked the question, what's the projected revenue? You're going to build this thing to house, I don't know how many cars. I don't know what the pricing structure is or whatever. I would certainly think if you're going to build something that's going to generate revenue, that would have been the first and foremost. I said, okay, that revenue is going to pay down the bond. Or I don't know what the delta is, but that was striking. That was never. Everybody in that room must have understood the answer why it wasn't considered, except for me, because it was never asked.
I can send you that revenue projection, which was part of the packet, Gordy, but I can, Commissioner LaPointe, I can send you the revenue projections.
Is it, and when you're looking at building something, here's the cost, here's the the annual cost, I assume you're applying the revenue that facility is going to generate to pay down the bond?
It's a revenue bond from the tax increment financing. So we look at how much TIF is collected to pay back those bond payments on a yearly basis. So it's the revenue from that TIF 97 area, so that those revenues are projected out to know when can we build and how the bond payments would be made.
Couldn't you do a general obligation bond, and then you could funnel the money from you could build that into your cost structure? Well, anyway, it would seem to me if you're building something that's going to generate revenue, those monies would be first and foremost dedicated to pay down that. The other thing, and my last comment is, there was a lot of discussion at the meeting. Some of the commissioners understood that the people in that don't reside in the city are in essence subsidizing this. And some city commissioners thought, well, no, all of this revenue, all of this is coming from the taxpayers in Traverse City, and this is having no impact on the other municipalities within Grand Traverse. Here's a quote, again, that I thought was interesting. And this is from one of the DDA current board members, and this is a direct quote. And this was his comment about who's really funding these TIFs. He said, I think it's important to make the point that the TIF taxing structure is an important responsibility that all the citizens and entities are asked to pay and should pay. He said, explain that it funds core infrastructure repairs downtown. Now here's the important one. It's the only ability we have to tax the people who use our city. So at least they're admitting that they are taxing the people outside of the city to the benefit of the city. And that's fine, and that's kind of what a TIF does. But there seemed to be some denial at the meeting that this has any impact. If you don't live in the DDA, you're not paying any of this. This is not costing you anything, when in fact, it is money that would have gone to the county or to Beta or the veterans or Commission on Aging. All of those entities are contributing, which benefit the people in the entire county, not just the city. So clearly, I want to make the point, the people outside of the city are contributing, use the word tax, to support the TIF.
That's absolutely true.
Okay, thank you.
That's absolutely true.
Some people seem to be in denial of that.
Yeah, it's the cost sharing. So it's the collection of the Bay Area Transportation, it's NMC, it's the county, it's the city. So it's those taxing jurisdictions that are contributing towards the TIF.
And this is my last comment. As mentioned, it's not the answer, and it was, you mentioned about the parking and, where does this end? Satellite parking. I mean, for people who are shopping, they probably want to drive in because whatever. But people who are working, you're talking about building the working base down here. I'm surprised we haven't looked really, really hard at satellite parking. Land's much more affordable. You get the cars out of coming into the city. The workers are here 8 hours a day. Parking with Beta. I mean, that should be, in my mind, explored in absolute detail before you expend $25 million on here's another parking deck, which has all the problems of more traffic, more cars, more issues.
And satellite parking is being investigated.
It should be.
You want it first.
I want it.
We're doing it in tandem.
Before you go to the third deck, you did 2 decks, do a satellite parking, and then see how that works out and see if you need a third deck.
There's no one silver bullet, I can tell you that. It's going to be multiple solutions when it comes to building the core downtown. And it is about the parking deck, and it is about satellite parking. It is about the partnership with Beta. The more density you have, the more viable that the Bay Area our public transportation
Well, you
will be
did
as well.
a detailed study on a third deck, the cost structure, et cetera, and the number of spaces. I mean, you had those massive spreadsheets.
Yeah.
Before you pull the trigger on that, I would like to think that you would go through and do a detailed analysis of an alternative of satellite parking. Just get an idea of what the beta, how you would work with beta, what that would be, how many spots. Do poll of people. If you had free parking out here versus what you're paying here, would you participate in satellite parking? If you could then get bus service during the rush hour, between these hours, and you'd be in town in 10 minutes.
And we've done that survey relative to the program that is in currently for Beta, the Destination Downtown, that is free to downtown employees, and we have gotten about 35 people. So the car, we are an auto-centric community, and we're trying to get out of that, but we are trying, Commissioner LaPointe.
Raise the rates in your parking structures, and we'll force them to do it, but anyway. I'm done. Thank you.
Jewett?
Gene, I just have a question here on this TIF 97. Why, I mean, we're 8 years from it expiring, so why is it so important to extend it now? I mean, we still have 8 years. I mean, maybe in the next 8 years, a new TIF plan may be more feasible than extending this one. But I mean, we're looking at extending it 8 to 20 years. We still have 8 years before it expires. What?
It's being able to plan. So then we know that we need a West End parking structure. So being able to do that, we need to know, can we bond? We can't bond for an 8-year bond. We know it's going to be a 20-year bond issue. So to be able to know and to start building that in 2021, we have to extend TIF 97 to be able to bond for that deck.
I guess my confusion is, why don't we create a new TIF with the new agreement amongst the partners and just let this one expire and work underneath now? And I guess I don't know as much about these TIF programs as some of the other commissioners here, but I guess that's why don't we create something new to go ahead and accommodate for this new parking structure, let this one expire, and like I said, the partners could have a new agreement that's feasible for everybody.
Because if we reset the TIF, we can't build the parking structure. There's not enough TIF to be able to do that even in 10 to 15 years. So
Wasn't
we've
this
done
original TIF, though, intended to build these structures already within this time frame?
Yes.
Okay, so why has this West End one not been built within this time frame?
I've been here for about 19 months. I can say that it's taken time to put the property, we needed to get the property into public ownership, and it's taken time to get everything in place to be able to do that.
I guess my concern is, I mean, this goes back to 97, and here we are 2019, so we've already been into it for a number of years to go ahead and acquire the property and make this happen under this original agreement.
Yeah, the property was acquired in 2014, so, and then it's taken this long to be able to know how we're going to proceed forward.
No, I understand. I guess I'm just kind of wondering why, since 97 to 2014, why it took so long to acquire property when it was already in the plans to build this deck and everything, And then, I guess my other comment is, you talk about all the growth since these decks have gone in. I mean, that's just presumed that may be attributed to them. I mean, we don't know that this growth would not have happened without these parking structures.
And that is typical of what a lot of people will say, well, it would happen anyway, but it didn't. Because we did have those pieces in place, particularly when you look at the history of 1978, when DDA did come into existence. The open space wasn't there. There was a power plant there. There was a lot of, nobody went to that beach. Things changed since 1978, that we know that the pieces that we put into place, that is why private investment occurred. And there's a reason why we put the DDA in place, to be able to ensure that when pennies went out, Horizon went in, that the surface parking lots are now not surface parking lots and vacant, that we actually have businesses downtown. So I say there's a direct correlation when you have a focused energy on a strategic public infrastructure approach to get private investment inside a specific area. Particularly when you look at the land, I still go back to that land mass of 8 acres for the city. The
Square
city-
miles.
Square miles, sorry.
Which,
8 square miles.
Maybe that's the problem. All the plan's been assuming we're
It's
yeah,
8.
8 acres.
which is
square miles.
5,120 acres, just so you know.
Pardon me?
It is 5,120 acres.
Which is 2% of the county's land mass.
Yeah, but
And I'll
still,
go
I
back
mean, it's
to
still a
that,
big
too.
portion within the city, so.
Which is why it's so important to really focus on that you have residential and you have commercial, and where are those going to mix. And there's a very small area there that we can have commercial development when you have an airport that's off the tax rolls, NMC that's off the tax rolls, and Munson that's off the tax rolls. So of those square miles that we have, there's only 57% that's taxable value. So it's very important to really strategically look at where we're having investment inside the city.
And the parking decks are on the tax rolls?
The parking decks are not on the tax rolls
Okay.
because we want to have private investment to the fullest land use.
Thank you very much for coming. Just piggybacking on what Commissioner Jewett was asking, the existing parking decks, not on the tax rolls, but they do bring in revenue. And the revenue goes to the DDA, or it goes to the city, or,
The parking deck revenues?
yeah,
Goes to the city of Traverse City. It's an enterprise fund.
it's an enterprise fund, okay. And I don't know what the scale of those are. I imagine you probably do, but I'm trying to formulate the question as far as like, aside from how they were built at this point, they would be probably self-sustaining revenues coming in from them to manage and operate and maintain those if they,
For the maintenance, yes.
yeah, okay. So the counterfactual also that he was asking, like, because he's right, that the whole TIF system presumes that it's a good investment because the increase in tax dollars that wouldn't have happened but for the investments that we made through TIF. And of course, there's no way of knowing other than, I take that back. You can't really directly assess, although you can say, tax rolls in the immediate vicinity were X until this actual infrastructure actually opened, and within 2-3 years, we actually finally saw the growth rate then and there. But the other, so it's, I guess it's why it's so hard to jump behind TIF and wave the banner and give full-throated support for it, because it's such a convoluted thing. But as a city dweller by choice, having lived in several and having lived, the model of office building, parking garage right next to it, office building, parking garage, office building, parking garage, is kind of my stress dream. It would be the nightmare that wakes me up, because that, as a city, like if that's what we were, instead of 2 parking decks and the rest of the city all being, I don't think that we would have this, I don't think people would move to Traverse City or the Grand Traverse region to that. I don't think as an overall system that would, I understand individually, it seems to be fair and they bought it. But I was going, revenue, square foot, is the other thing I think to consider, as a guy who's been in Michigan for 16 years but not born and raised, is to look around at other communities that are similarly situated along Lake Michigan, along bays, who, it's been a couple of years since I was down to Manistee, but we seem to be different, and significantly so. The growth that happens here, and it's not because of one thing, but I think that, I guess that still is my intuition, and I don't have the hard and fast numbers to prove it, but my intuition is that one of the things that we're doing differently is the way we've maintained the Downtown Development Authority and TIFs along with that to make some pretty strategic investments, which a lot of times I think TIF investments go totally haywire. They're kind of using public money for private development, and it can get shady fast. I don't think that's what we've got here. I think we've seen some pretty good use of the money, and I'm happy with that. And I just, whatever we do with it, be cautious of that that impulse to rip it out because it's not fair or whatever. Because I think that it may be a part of one of what's helped us develop over the last, the $3 million in 1985 was the TIF2, and it's $45 million now. $30 million was the taxable value base in 1997 for the TIF 97 district, and 20 years later it's $105 million. I get that all that money isn't necessarily flowing back to the county yet, but I don't think that other, Ludington, Manistee, other ones kind of similarly situated along the lake have seen that growth, and we should be careful about changing things like that.
Mr. Klaus?
The enterprise fund that that you referred to, that the meter fees go to, what does that enterprise fund take care of? What's it for?
It's for the 2 parking structures that we have. It's for the maintenance and for replacement.
So 100% of the parking fees goes to maintenance and replacement?
No, maintenance, replacement, and operations. So you have an operational components for those parking structures too.
So there's none of that money then to actually go for constructing. There's no extra money out of those parking structures to even help fund and build a 3rd parking structure?
No, not at this time, according to our finance. But I can say that the parking bought the property. So the parking enterprise fund bought the land for the parking structure.
Oh, okay. How much was that, do you know? That piece of property?
A little over $1 million, I believe. I can't remember off the top of my head. It was over $1 million.
Is that the piece of property that, and I vaguely remember at a board meeting that the owner of that piece of property was provided money from, we would have approved to take some, maybe not USDA money, but take some funding to see that owner of that property was paid.
So the owner of the property was Lou Ferris.
Okay.
It is the property that's right next to Gordy Fraser, and he retained the front side of Front Street, so that a small strip, so retail would be in the front, similar to what we did at the Hardy parking structure, with both structures. And then he owns that property owner owns 124 West Front Street.
Okay. So will that property be attached to the parking structure?
No,
Okay.
no.
Commissioner LaPointe?
Yeah, I said, my last question, but since you raised the point, the enterprise fund that's been collecting the revenue from the parking decks, do you have any idea what the fund balance on that enterprise fund is?
I do not.
Can you,
I can get that for you.
okay, thank you.
Okay. Are we ready to take public questions?
Yes.
I just wanted to respond one thing to Commissioner Hundley, you identified that the TIF is used for public and not private, and you're a little sure of that. Be 100% sure that the TIF only goes to public infrastructure projects. It does not, it's not an incentive for private development.
Okay. So we are going to open it up. I'll give you, just start with your name and where you're from and
Well,
comments.
my name is Scott Hardy. I live on Washington Street, 521. I'm a member of the DDA board. I'm also former city commissioner and a former county planning commissioner. I sort of wanted to start with a couple of points and I'll address some of the concerns that all of you have expressed, if I can remember all of them at this point, because I didn't take notes. First and foremost, this whole discussion operates on the premise, seemingly, that the TIF dollars, that incremental increase in taxable value that we're right now talking about would happen without TIF or with or without TIF. I think it's important to talk to people like Hagerty, because I was involved in the Old Town parking deck and us trying to save them, and when they were being courted by the state of Arizona and the state of Colorado and numerous other entities out there, they would not be here if we hadn't used tax increment financing, helped build the deck, and have them pay for those spots. That brings up a point that Brad Jewett had mentioned about seemingly we're providing free parking for businesses downtown as a incentive for them to build here. Forefront Credit Union is going into the Pine Street development. They've committed to the second and third floor. They're going to take probably about 15 to 20,000 square feet there. Their employees that park across the street are going to pay for those permits. There's nothing free about that. All we're doing at this point is saying to them, we'd rather have you use your property within that 60-foot envelope that now suddenly is constrained development. We'd rather have you use that property to its maximum, highest, best value. So they also will have some on-site parking of their own, so they are providing some of their own parking. When we talk about the incremental gain in spaces, Gordy, you brought it up. We were renting those spaces from private landowners on that Pine Street property. So the net gain we're talking about, yes, is in terms of the raw number of spaces we're actually gaining. That's true. We're also saving the rent that was there. We're maximizing the value of the property. We're shifting those spaces over to the parking deck on Pine Street. And I think in the long run, that's a great incentive for both the city and the county in the long run. We've also used the number anywhere from 8 to 30 years about how long this thing's going to get extended. As a matter of fact, we've even talked about in perpetuity. What we're saying right now is that this thing will be extended from 8 to 13 years. We talked about some hybrid version of something that would incent the county to support us, and that's why we're here. We'd like your support. Instead of simply saying we'll give you back some of the revenue, what we're saying is we'll end this as soon as we can. We're trying to find ways, and I was on that committee with Richard.
You're fine, keep going.
Am I done? Oh,
No,
okay.
you're fine.
I was on the committee with Richard that talked about ways to do this. That was one of the incentives we thought we could bring to you, is to say we'll do our best with a 20-year bond to end it in 8 years from its extension point. Ron, you talked about Plant Moran. Plant Moran is the poster child right now for why private entities don't build private parking decks. They bought that building from the original owner for pennies on a dollar because the original owner couldn't make a go of that building because he had so much space committed to free parking for customers, and that lot is seldom ever filled, which means that they didn't have enough customers to drive the revenue for the rest of the building to support it. So it's one of the reasons that private entities don't get into private parking decks is because they simply can't afford the use of that space. God, I'm trying to think of other things. We talked about infrastructure. You talked about streetscapes. We would forego streetscapes. We can't forego stormwater issues. We can't forego bridges that we're paying for to retain. The infrastructure we're talking about are projects that will not go away if TIF goes away. Somebody's going to pay for those. Obviously, it's going to be the city of Traverse City. I appreciate, as a lifelong resident here, my dad obviously was involved on the county commission and the city commission, I appreciate the collaboration with the county. I appreciate it tremendously. I think what we're saying right now is we can't stop developing areas of the city and the tax base that goes with that simply because we don't want to extend one of the only tools we have to incent development in TIF 97. It's critical that we do this. The west end of town, you've seen it, is not developed. The 145 parcel right now doesn't have a deck on it. The 124 parcel, which is the old Sledder's, Julius Sledder Ford dealership, is sitting dormant right now. The Pine Street project is moving forward, but they're moving forward on the promise that we would help them with a parking solution that their employees would help pay for. People are not going to take that risk if we don't look as a region like we're willing to support that with at least funding the infrastructure improvements that we need. So I appreciate the fact that you guys are willing to listen. I appreciate the fact that Gene was here to talk about this to you. We're not taking anything for granted. I know what procedurally could happen. We would love your support. And I think it's important that we sit here and present these things the best we can. So, I mean, that's my statement. Again, I have a vested stake in this. I'm a DDA member. I'm also a commercial realtor. And I can tell you right now, I was working with Michigan State Credit Union. They're coming into town. One of the reasons they're coming into town is because they see us as a vibrant partner in what they want to do. And the fact that they can dedicate their monies to building on Union Street a 3-story building that doesn't have to include parking because there's a deck within 500 feet of them. So all of that really is some of the incentive they have for choosing us as a region to invest their money.
Any
Okay?
questions
Thank you.
for Scott? Okay, thanks, Scott. Morning.
Good morning. I'm Penny Hill, Assistant City Manager for the City of Traverse City. And I would like to say that our city manager extends his apologies. He's unable to be here today, but I personally think that all the governing boards back in 1978, 1997 were very forward-thinking because that was an opportunity to present a comprehensive development plan for the core downtown of the city of Traverse City that came with a very valuable thing, a very valuable tool, tax increment financing, that allowed this development in the improvements in infrastructure to take place. As has been said earlier, this is not a sole solution. It is part of a solution. Similar to the affordable housing. That is not a sole solution. It's part of a whole process that takes everybody working together collaboratively to accomplish a goal. And it's a never-ending goal. If you're not always changing, always moving forward, the alternative is you're dying. And I don't think anybody here wants that. I think that the DDA has done a fabulous job at helping investment in this community and in this county. So just wanted to say that the City of Traverse City thanks all of you for your cooperation and your support throughout the years. We, as you said, Commissioner Henschel, it is unusual to find this level of cooperation anywhere in the state. We've been really fortunate to have that. Thank you.
Thanks, Penny.
Good morning. Tom Bensley, Grand Traverse County Sheriff. I would urge you not to support a TIF 97 extension, which could be from 8 to 13 or 8 to 20 years in length. TIF 97 is set to expire in 2027, after 30 years in existence. There's nothing that says that TIF 97 could not be extended again and again, and possibly in perpetuity. And we didn't cooperate on that word. TIF 97 has served its purpose. It's estimated that Grand Traverse County's general fund will lose an estimated $3.6 million, and probably much more, until TIF 97 is scheduled to end in 2027 after a 30-year run. Should TIF 97 end in 2027 as scheduled, the county's general fund revenue will annually increase by more than $450,000 per year. In 2027, the county will still have 7 more years on their MERS pension debt payment plan, and the $450,000 in additional revenue will help the county's bottom line. Grand Traverse County has not funded any additional police officers for the sheriff's office in the past 15 years. We have the same number of county-funded officers now as we had in 2004. I find it ironic that the TIF capture money is being used to support a Traverse City police officer to work downtown. There's a proposed expansion of the DDA district on 8th Street from the 8th Street Bridge to Barlow Street. Currently, there is no plan for a TIF district for this expansion. However, that's today. That does not preclude a TIF district being established in the future. The 2018 DDA annual report states that a benefit of TIF is that downtown Traverse City serves as a revenue generator for the city and the county. What is the total amount of revenue generated for Grand Traverse County because of TIF 97? Probably the most compelling reason.
Keep going, you're fine.
Probably the most compelling reason not to extend TIF 97 is that downtown Traverse City's self-proclaimed savior, Michael Moore, and his film festival has saved downtown Traverse City. Co-founders John Williams and Doug Stanton have apparently been edited out and have ended up on the cutting room floor. According to Moore, he picked up a boarded, desolate, and barren downtown Traverse City and put it on his back and carried it to the top of the mountain. I'm sure he will continue. Notwithstanding the fact that Rotary Charities put millions and millions of dollars into the shuttered Park Place Hotel and the State Theater. For decades, city leaders, the Downtown Traverse City Association, established in 1960, the DDA, the City Opera House Group, the Chamber of Commerce, Brian Crow, and longtime downtown Traverse City merchants, such as the Glazmer family at Vitruba Leather Goods, the Wolf family at Peterdill Drugs, the Allen family at the Captain's Quarters, the Goldens at Golden Shoes, the Rogers at Bartlings, Lyle DeYoung from DeYoung Wallpaper and Paint, Ross Biederman and his investment in Radio Center, and many, many more downtown merchants who, for the past several decades, have survived not only one, but 2 malls opening in Garfield Township. These people and their businesses have persevered through many years of dedicated work and service to downtown Traverse City, and going forward, I'm sure others will step in to continue the work that has kept downtown Traverse City prosperous and a destination community long into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. All right, anyone else from the public? Any other comments or questions from the board? All right. That was second public comment, so. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you all.